A former U.S. Marine accused of killing his girlfriend and fleeing the country is now at the center of a major legal reversal. Prosecutors essentially admit they withheld key evidence, forcing the case back to a preliminary hearing and reopening what once looked like a straightforward path to trial. We are going to break down the details of this terribly tragic case and what this latest development means going forward. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. This all began with a woman who was found dead in a San Diego apartment and a boyfriend who vanished without a trace. And what followed was a years-long international manhunt, a trail of false identities stretching across Central America, and now a stunning legal reversal that could potentially upend the entire case. At the center of it all is Raymond R.J. McGeough, a former U.S. Marine accused of murdering his girlfriend, 30-year-old Crystal Mitchell, back in 2016. For nearly a decade, prosecutors have painted McGeough as a violent fugitive who fled justice. But now, in a dramatic courtroom twist, a judge has granted him a new preliminary hearing after prosecutors admitted, or seemingly admitted, they failed to turn over evidence, thousands of pages, reportedly including intimate messages between McGeough and Mitchell that the defense claims supports a very different narrative. The defense claims that Crystal's death was the result of consensual, rough sex gone wrong. Yes, that is the defense's strategy. And it is forcing a re-examination of a case that was once thought to be open and shut. And when we talk about a preliminary hearing, that is the opportunity for the prosecution to present their evidence. Is there sufficient probable cause to move forward toward a trial? It's one of the initial stages of a criminal case. So I'm going to get into what is next in this legal saga. But first, we got to go back to the night it all began, June 9th, 2016. Crystal Mitchell, McGeough, then 32, had traveled from Phoenix to San Diego to visit a friend who'd recently had a baby. The couple was apparently staying in the guest room of an apartment in the quiet Allied Gardens neighborhood. That night, things apparently took a dark turn. Witnesses at a local bar say that they saw McGeough, supposedly intoxicated, slap Crystal. This prompted a concerned patron to step in. The confrontation apparently escalated into a fight before the two left together. Police say surveillance footage later showed McGeough placing his hand on Crystal's throat as they entered the apartment elevator. But that night out at the bar, that was the last time anyone would physically see Crystal Mitchell alive. The next morning, when neither McGeough nor Crystal emerged, it was McGeough's friend who made the horrifying discovery: Crystal's lifeless body lying in the guest room. He later recounted that moment on the stand during an initial preliminary hearing last year.
Did the defendant come to your house in San Diego on June 10th of 2016?
Yes. The master bedroom was off to the left, living room, dining room area in the middle, and the spare bedroom where the two stayed was off to the far right. A good amount of blood on both the bed and on the floor on the side of the bed closest to the door. I also noticed that there were some items that were kind of thrown about the room.
First responders, they documented this severe bruising on her neck, signs of a violent struggle, and a trail of blood, essentially a trail of blood, leading from the elevator to the apartment. Now, McGeough, meanwhile, he was gone. Instead of calling 911, prosecutors allege he fled, renting a car at the San Diego airport and driving it into Mexico before abandoning it. For the next 6 years, he was detected in Guatemala, Belize, eventually El Salvador, where he was found to be working as an English teacher under an alias. His time as a fugitive even earned him a spot in the U.S. Marshals 15 Most Wanted list. But in the end, it wasn't just law enforcement that was able to catch up with him. It was Crystal's mother, Josephine Wenzel, a former detective who played a pivotal role in tracking him across borders. In fact, we had the privilege of speaking with Josephine in a previous episode of Sidebar, and if you haven't listened to it yet, we highly recommend it. Her story is nothing short of remarkable. A former detective, a mother, driven by grief, she became just a relentless advocate for justice after the death of her daughter, and she refused to back down, choosing instead to work hand in hand with law enforcement, using every tool she could to help find and track down her daughter's alleged killer. And shortly after Crystal's death, Josephine created a Facebook group. It's called Angels of Justice, where she shared updates about the case, photos of Raymond McGeough, calls to action, hoping to keep his face and name in the public eye until he was found. Now, we wanted to bring Josephine back onto the show to discuss the case further, but due to the status of this upcoming preliminary hearing, the legal restrictions, we'll talk about the hearing as well, she wasn't able to join us this time, unfortunately. However, we can still share this powerful piece of her story from our previous episode and her tireless, deeply personal effort to bring her daughter's alleged killer to justice. Take a listen.
I took the bull by the horn and said, no, I'm going to be boots on the ground and I'm going to follow through. And so I started communicating with the marshal. I started looking into online resource and I went and took a 3-day course in Las Vegas to learn about searches, online searches and stuff like that. And to meet investigators, to meet police investigators that were taking the class and marshals. And I had to find this guy and I had to navigate through the internet and I didn't know how. So I had to learn. And I just started pounding the pavement and I went on to the police buy and sell where everybody was at and everybody's paying attention. And that's where it took off. And I started hitting all the sites where you had the most people would be at, which is buy and sell places. And I started putting out $50,000 reward. Back then it was $11,000. My battle's not over. It just begun. And I believe that the healing is in the fight, and I tell these families to turn their pain into power. Then they know that they have done everything or they're doing everything possible for their child. And that is healing in itself.
So in August of 2022, according to the U.S. Marshals Service, McGeough was located at a school in El Salvador where, as I mentioned before, he was teaching English. Authorities arrested him. He was extradited back to San Diego, where he remains in custody without bond. Now, to hear more about Josephine's incredible journey and story, again, definitely go back, check out that earlier episode featuring her full interview. Now, before we go any further into the case, to help me break all this down, I want to bring on a special guest, Anthony Osso, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, specialized in these kinds of cases. Anthony, good to see you. Where this case stands today, we are talking about a homicide investigation. We're talking about signs of strangulation. We're talking about potentially a domestic violence situation. A lot of different factors here. What are you taking away from it, from our initial reading of the case?
Well, so far it's, a lot. This case has a lot of common elements that you see in domestic violence homicides. With strangulation, it's a very up close and personal way to cause somebody's death that often arises out of emotions, which you find in domestic violence relationships. And so it's got some of that textbook sort of evidence in this case. And I'm sure that there's a lot of evidence of the relationship surrounding the homicide that's really important in this trial.
Does leaving the country and potentially having a fake alias, does that automatically make you guilty of murder? Or, as we'll get into, could there be something that happened between the two and someone panics and they leave and they think the police are going to not believe their story, and it doesn't necessarily mean they're guilty of, let's say, a murder case?
I don't think it automatically means you're guilty of murder, but I think it's a horrible piece of evidence for any defendant. And I think that it's an opportunity for the prosecution to stand up and say, regardless of how scared you were, this is somebody that you should have cared about, that you did care about, that you were in a relationship with. And rather than come clean, or rather than tell your side of the story, you chose to flee for 6 years. So that's going to be an uphill battle, and it's going to really depend on jury selection and the defense's ability to really get that theory out that there was panic in Mr. McGeough's mind.
By the way, as you know, we are always writing sidebars, researching, doing breaking news, and I am constantly on the run. And when I am, I'm hungry. And it's not so easy to just grab something. So that is why I'm so happy we have Huel as our sponsor. It's spelled H-U-E-L. And this, their Black Edition ready to drink, this is a total game changer. Why? This is a complete meal in one bottle. 35 grams of protein, 27 vitamins and minerals, high fiber, low sugar, so you feel full, focused, ready for your day. There's no prep, there's no cleanup, just grab and go. Huel has already sold over 500 million meals around the world. Also, by the way, affordable Gets you everything you need in less than $5. And I love how many different flavors they have. Iced coffee, strawberry banana, chocolate. So when I'm rushing to get Sidebar done, particularly in breaking news, I can always grab one of these bottles. Start saving time and money without compromising your nutrition today with this exclusive offer for new customers of 15% off plus a free gift using our exclusive code SIDEBAR at Huel.com. Please see our description for the terms and conditions. Skip the stress, not the nutrition. Let's talk about that defense's theory. So McLeod's defense, they introduced this new theory, okay? That her death, they claimed, was not murder, but a tragic accident that resulted from, and I don't know the best way to say this, but consensual erotic asphyxiation. It's a form of rough sex. It involves oxygen deprivation. And to support this claim, the defense called two high-profile expert witnesses, names that you have likely heard before. One, Dr. Drew Pinsky, the celebrity physician, testified about the dangers of consensual choking, explaining how easily it can turn fatal. And also, Dr. Michael Baden, renowned forensic pathologist, supported the claim that this was not necessarily intentional violence. Prosecutors, though, they push back. They push back hard. They portrayed McLeod as this violent and volatile man. They pointed to multiple red flags: the apparent altercation at the bar, surveillance footage showing his hand on Crystal's throat in the elevator, and most damning, his immediate flight from the country, like we talked about. But back then, San Diego Superior Court Judge Kimberly Legata ultimately ruled there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. Her words were quite pointed, saying it's the severity of the injuries, it's the force required to cause those injuries that negate accident. And so McLeod's trial was originally set to take place earlier this year, but once again, the case took another unexpected turn. Now we'll get to that, but first, Anthony, you go back to this, okay? Have you heard of a case, have you heard a defense like that before?
Not specifically with regard to sexual acts, or that was some form of consensual sex, but accidental or accidental killings are argued all the time, and so it's not an uncommon defense. And I think, based on the fact that he fled for 6 years, I think that it's a defense that lines up with the defense's need to explain that sort of panic on behalf of Mr. McGeough. So it's not a novel defense, but you don't see that all the time.
Now I got to go to this latest plot twist, okay? So according to NBC7 San Diego, McLeod's legal team has now dropped another explosive allegation. They have claimed that prosecutors failed to disclose extensive key evidence, including messages and images from Crystal's cell phone and computer that they say is critical to establishing the behavior in question was part of a consensual dynamic. Essentially, they say it is a lot of graphic, sexual exchanges, affectionate messages that allegedly contradict the prosecution's portrayal of an abusive relationship. Now, the defense didn't accuse the prosecution of deliberate misconduct, but emphasized the consequences of the oversight in writing. They wrote, without proper context, this act of Mr. McGeough placing his hand on Miss Mitchell's throat was portrayed as violent and a precursor to an intentional killing. However, the images and memes shared between Mr. McGeough and Miss Mitchell show this exact same behavior. Approval of this conduct is clearly established by their personal messages. And at a June 28th hearing, Deputy District Attorney Francesca Bellerio moved to dismiss the original case and immediately refile the murder charge. This is a legal move that allows a new preliminary hearing, this time with the disputed evidence on the record. The prosecution acknowledged the oversight, calling it, quote, an inadvertent mistake, but maintained that the outcome of the original hearing would have been the same, saying, while the people remain steadfast in our belief that the evidence in this case should result in a bind-over and murder conviction, we nonetheless strive to give the defense a full and fair opportunity to present this information at a preliminary hearing and safeguard the integrity of conviction on appeal. Anthony, I'm made of questions here. First of all, are you concerned that this wasn't turned over? Let's start there.
Absolutely. I mean, that is a huge problem, and obviously the defense is seizing on the prosecution's actions in this case, whether they were purpose or inadvertent. But that is a huge problem. You know, it's Brady v. Maryland. It's the seminal case that states that anytime there's evidence favorable to the accused, the prosecution must turn that evidence over. And it doesn't matter whether it was inadvertent or on purpose.
Now, the next question is, does it get past a preliminary hearing? What do I mean by that? If you present this evidence to the court, can the court say, you know what, I think that this negates the elements of the crimes. I don't think there's actually a crime here anymore. Or do they say, this is important, but this is for a trier of fact. This is for the jury. I'm going to move this forward.
I think the latter, Jesse. I think that if the judge hears this evidence, I think it's something that the trier of fact should decide in this case. And I don't know that it's enough to negate all the other evidence against Mr. McLeod in this case. But I do think what the judge can take up during this preliminary hearing is whether the prosecutor's withholding of that evidence was purposeful or was inadvertent, and whether that should be a dismissal with prejudice or not. So they can still take that up at a later hearing.
Let's say this goes now to a trial, okay, and this evidence comes in, whatever these messages apparently say, and the jury looks at it, and now they're looking at that surveillance footage in a different way, maybe. Does this mean that, does this complicate the prosecution's case in a significant way? Will the jury believe that, wait a minute, that surveillance footage shows maybe things were consensual? Maybe this story, as twisted as it is, about, strange sex gone bad, maybe it makes a little bit more sense. Maybe this is not a murder.
Anything's possible, Jesse, in a trial. I think that it's a big hurdle for the defense to overcome, and I think something the prosecutor can hang their hat on is Mr. McLeod moving to El Salvador, creating a new identity, and leading an entirely new life. The defense really has to create a sort of narrative of panic coupled with this consensual sexual act. I also think that the surrounding circumstances around their relationship are going to be important in this case. So that patron at the bar that had to step in is going to be a really important witness for the prosecution.
Is Mr. McLeod going to be an important witness? In these kinds of cases, we always talk about whether a defendant would take the stand. And obviously, now we're talking about the case being refiled, going to a preliminary hearing. We're still in such the early stages of the criminal process. But I can't not think for the fact it's not necessarily a self-defense case, but I think it would have to be necessary, particularly with these messages, for him to go on the stand and explain what his relationship was like, and for the jury to understand. I can't imagine a situation where he doesn't take the stand and explain it. I mean, it's his choice, but...
Absolutely. It depends entirely on how his defense team feels he'd testify. He's got a lot of explaining to do. He's going against experienced prosecutors, and they're going to make sort of a mockery out of his story that he panicked, moved to Mexico, El Salvador, and changed his name. So he's going to there's a lot of cross fodder here that he'll have to deal with. And that's something the defense is going to take into account. But to your earlier point, if he wants to get the idea out that she was a willing participant in this kind of behavior and explain the acts prior to what led to her death, then he's going to have to probably take the stand.
What do you think about the experts? The experts who have now tried to, provide pause as this to being a violent encounter gone, bad, versus, I imagine, the prosecution's experts who say this goes beyond any kind of, rough sex. It's going to be a battle of the experts, right?
Yes, hugely important that the defense is calling experts, because I think to get a jury of your peers to wrap their head around the idea that consensual choking could lead to death is a big hurdle. And so they need to hear it from somebody that's an expert in that field that can convince them or make them feel comfortable in the jury room that they're making a decision that is sound. So the experts are important. And again, it's reasonable doubt. And that's all that the defense has to raise in this case. And if an expert can do that, then that scores points for the defense with a jury.
Does the defense and the prosecution during jury selection, do they have to ask the jurors, hey, are you familiar with who Drew Pinsky is, or are you familiar who Dr. Michael Bodden is? Do they say that to the jury during jury selection process? Because they're like very, very well known, and Drew Pinsky's basically a celebrity. You have to ask the jurors, right, if they know these people, do they know any of the witnesses, do they have any connection? Because you don't want them giving more weight to the witnesses based on a celebrity or based on them being known. You want to give weight based on what they testified to. I imagine that has to be an issue.
Absolutely. And that's a question that you'll hear oftentimes from the judge before the prosecutor and defense stand up. And if the judge doesn't ask it, the prosecution certainly would. when jurors go into a trial, they can only weigh the witness's credibility based on their testimony. And so if they go in with a predeceived bias or notion that this witness is credible or not credible before they testify, then that's a violation of the law.
Now, McGeough remains in custody without bail. He has pleaded not guilty to the refiled charge. A new preliminary hearing is scheduled, we believe, for October 6th. Real quick, preliminary hearings in general, have you seen a situation where the defense is successful and they're able to get the case dropped at that stage?
Typically, you don't see that. And it really varies jurisdiction to jurisdiction. A lot of times you have grand juries that decide to make that decision and return indictments. So for a judge to decide that there's no probable cause to move forward with trial is uncommon. And a lot of times you're just taking up pretrial matters during those preliminary hearings.
No, I agree with you. And look, I will say this is just a really, really sad case, no matter which angle it is, no matter which narrative you look at. It presents a lot of interesting legal questions. It's been quite the journey, to say the least. We'll keep a careful eye on it. Anthony Osso, so great seeing you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.